Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to leg 5 of the podcast relay. Really looking forward to this afternoon's conversation. I am joined here by Caspar Berry. Caspar, thank you very much for joining us. I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction while everyone is able to come in and join, as we've just gone live. So we are in leg 5. So we kicked off with Catherine Granger, who passed to Claire Balding, who made a very swift handover to Krista Cullen, followed by Kelly Brown, who has made the handover to Caspar Berry. So we are having a very varied opportunity to explore the question that if I knew then what I know now, so what? What difference would we make? And I'm really, really looking forward to the opportunity to have the conversation with you this afternoon, Caspar, about this as well. I guess by way of kicking things off, Caspar, a couple of things. It'd be great to know through your words how you describe yourself. So there's various descriptions out there of you, but I think it's always most important to hear how the guests describe themselves, and also just, you know, how the last couple of months have been for you and what you're in the middle of at the moment and how things are from your perspective before we get into the bulk of the conversation.
Great. So I am a former professional poker player, is the best way of putting that. It's really important and important to the context of this conversation to understand that although that does form the basis of my work now, which is as a professional speaker and trainer, I did that 20 years ago. So it's a part of me, but it's actually quite a small part of me. Mm-hmm. So now I'm a professional speaker and trainer. The arse of which has completely fallen out in the last 2 months. And I'm having a whale of a time, to be honest with you. I've wanted a sabbatical for like the last 15 years. The problem when you're a speaker and trainer is it's very hard to say no to work because the amount that you get paid for each individual job is quite enticing. It's very difficult to go no. You have to phone up all the speaker bureaus and go, take me off the books. You don't want to do that because they might never put you back on again. So the upshot of it is that it's quite a disciplined thing to do, to take a sabbatical, unless the world's phones just stop ringing, in which case it's really simple. So I've had a great time, and actually during the course of this conversation I'll talk about that a little bit, that I've been enjoying not doing anything. You know, I haven't gone, so I'm running to Zimbabwe for charity. I'm thinking, reading. I've enjoyed the sunshine and a lot of things that, you know, maybe are a bit taboo, like we just shouldn't stop, but I'm finding stopping brilliant.
Yeah, and certainly a lot of people that we've been talking to over the last few months, actually the pausing and the stopping, the enforced pause for a lot of people, where they're in the position to be able to take advantage of that has definitely been a nice gear shift for them, and also a kind of a challenge of existing beliefs, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I do want to make that point. I'm very lucky to be able to do that. Do you know what I mean? I've put some savings aside, and so I can take a year off. Now I think I have to anyway, and I'm getting minimal money from the government, so it's lucky that I can do that. But I think where and when one can, it's a real gift to take that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And great that you've been in this pause moment as well, I guess, because if we're going to talk about some reflection and the power of reflection through if I knew then what I know now, so what, you know, hopefully there's been more time than you may have typically had to sort of pull together your answer. So where do you want to start with that? You know, if I knew then what I know now, but so what?
Well, I'm actually going to start with asking you a question, which I didn't prepare you for, but I think it's an interesting question. Maybe someone else previously had asked it, but I'm just curious, why, because I think it's a great question. What drew you to that question? Why do you want to know that from people?
Because of the power it brings in terms of reflection, but the opportunity to see how far you've grown. Because I definitely never wanted it to be a looking back with melancholy at what might have been. But actually, it's really that opportunity to actually reflect back upon some key points, realize the impact of change that's happened, because I then think that allows feeding forward with more confidence that, well, actually, you know, that made a significant change. I did learn that. I do know that now. Am I making the most of it?
Yeah.
Am I using that knowledge and actually developing the next chapter so I'll be able to reflect again? So it's very much driven by that growth rather than sort of, you know, having the chance to feel bad about previous points in time.
Right, which is regret. And obviously that's something that I speak about when you talk about risk. You can't help but talk about regret because they're two sides of the same coin in many ways. You take a risk in order to avoid regret. And so one of my observations about that, when I think about my life, right, and you asked me, effectively embedded within that question is to go back and to think about my life and what do you do differently if you know what you know now, is that I've always felt that we have one word, regret, which means two very different things, right? One of them is the way in which you described it here, which is to sort of flagellate ourselves for not doing things different. Do you know what I mean? Oh, I should have known that. But the other perfectly healthy way of using regret, I think, because I don't think there's an alternative word, feel free to suggest one, is like, I've learned things during that time. And if I knew then what I know now, I would have done things differently. So that's completely fine to say, I regret not doing it differently. It would have been better to have done it differently. But that doesn't mean to say that I'm going to beat myself up about it or dwell on it. You know, more that you ruminate on the lesson learned. You might have learned that lesson 5 times. You know, how many times do we go, oh, I knew I should trust my first instinct, or whatever it is, right? But so I think that it's one of those occasions where one word, the paucity of the English language, which doesn't have much paucity, it's an amazing language. But in this occasion, there isn't enough richness, I think, to describe that subtle distinction.
There isn't anything for the sort of, you know, the addition of valued perspective in one word, is there? Right.
But saying I'm completely comfortable with going, I would have done things differently. Because so I'm going to tell you now that you talk in your notes about going back to a specific age, and the specific age, in fact, I can cite it to a day. It's the 17th of June 1991, which is the day that I finished my A levels. And just to give a bit of perspective, I went to a good school. I think in my year we came 9th in the country by A level results.
Right.
So, you know, I'd had a good education. I knew, no, I didn't know at that point, but when the results came through, I knew I was going to Cambridge to study economics. So I'm an academic kid. And I just think that, and I felt this at the time, that I was just so unprepared for the world, basically. And so the starting point for me is that education prepares us very badly for the world. I remember being in Las Vegas, which obviously is my life story, but it's not significant. Sitting in a restaurant in Las Vegas with my mate. We must have been about 26 at the time. And I remember saying to him that there seems to be some people in life who were very driven. They were very focused. Now, I was driven because I knew from the age of 16, I'd been in Biker Grove, kids. I was in the first 2 series of Biker Grove as an actor. I knew that I wanted to be a film director. I thought I wanted to be a film director. So even when I went to Cambridge, I was way more focused than the average person. But I felt that, like, some people had been given this map of how the world worked, which I don't think I became exposed to until probably about 2004. I was about 31. And actually my exposure to that came through, not everyone's favorite guy, but Tony Robbins, you know, just exposing me to a different way of looking at things like goal setting. I went through that whole period of education, you know, without learning about goal setting. So that's the background to the answer. And then, as I've already sort of briefed you, what I want to do is I want to go through, it's a long list, but I'll go through it really, really quickly, of all the things that education does not teach you at all, right, which it could in the time that you're learning about chlorophyll or whatever it is, okay? Things that you'll never think about again.
I regularly use Jethro Tull's seed drill in my presentations to make the point that I try and force my entire educational curriculum into my world of work.
Just so it feels useful.
Yeah, indeed. That using nets to turn a 2-dimensional thing into a 3-dimensional. So yes, absolutely. I'm really trying to pay back my education, but I can't get it all in there. Chlorophyll is a challenge.
I try and use calculus on a daily basis. And by the way, calculus is brilliant. I mean, that's not my point. So listen here. So what do we learn during lockdown? Okay, here we go. This is what I would like to have learned. Okay, what I learned that I don't know. How to cook. I mean, nothing in my school. And there are some schools that teach home ec and you do cooking, and that's great, but all of this is subjective. How to sleep. I remember I did a 3-hour course at Cambridge at the age of 21 or 20 on how to sleep. And I was mind blown by the fact that I'd been through a whole education system without literally mentioning the word sleep and sleep cycle and REM and all that kind of thing. I think it's going quicker. How to clean a house, how to put up shelves, technical stuff generally. I'm 47 years old. I don't know how to change a plug. How to be alone. I heard this on Radio 5 Live recently, this author talking about how to be, everything's about how to socialize and be with people, how to be alone with your own thoughts. Of course, now with all the kids at home, how to be a parent, developmental psychology generally, how to teach people the Socratic method. Okay, now the other thing I've discussed with you is, after being a professional poker player, I knew I wanted to be a speaker. So I joined a company called the Mind Gym, which is a training company. And for 3 years of my life, went into companies, huge companies, the biggest companies on the planet, and gave 90-minute teaching sessions in the following and more, right? Why didn't we learn any of this at school? Because it clearly has value, because UBS Bank are prepared to pay thousands for their people to learn it. How to communicate clearly, how to have an idea, thinking laterally, the work of Edward de Bono, divergent thinking, critical thinking and evaluation, how to calm and still your mind, how to have a difficult conversation, how to be honest with other people, how to read other people's honesty, the habits and qualities of successful people, how to give feedback, how to manage your boss, how to lead and take responsibility. 7 Habits has sold 25 million copies because it teaches at least 7 things that have enormous value, starting with the end in mind, focusing on what you can control, how to motivate yourself, how to motivate others, how to organize time and prioritize, how to speak in public, oratory generally, what luck is and how to think about it, return on investment, what it is and how to achieve it, your USP as a person in the labour market. Sorry, but it goes on. Alain de Botton, do you know him? Alain de Botton and his work? Yeah. And again, you know, I know people who are paying a lot of money to learn these kind of life skills, and some people might think, well, that can't be taught, but it can, and people want to learn it. Things as simple as you might think is how to be nice, how to make friends, how to talk to people at a wedding or a dinner party, how to chat someone up, literally, how to interact on social media and how not to, how to develop, this is a big one for me and we'll talk about this later, how to develop self-worth that has nothing to do with other people, it doesn't emanate from the thoughts of others, how to keep an internal scorecard, how to disagree, how to debate and win, how to be in touch with your feelings, your sexuality, your sex and gender, how to creatively visualize, how to mend a broken heart, how to manage stress, resilience generally, how to bounce back. Nothing in 14 years of education on that. Focus, how to block out interruptions, how to find your bliss and your thing, how to tell a joke well, how to play a game well. Civics, I understand, are probably touching on this more, but don't worry, we're nearing the end. How to pay taxes, when to pay taxes, how and why we vote, how to interact with your MP, how to evaluate politicians' promises, how to travel and absorb culture. Business skills, I know you can study business now, but not everyone does, it's not compulsory. How to sell, keeping company accounts, bookkeeping, what is entrepreneurialism, how to manage risk, how to make a decision. There is a method for making a decision, it's what I teach. Companies pay me a lot of money. Could have learned it at 15, no reason why you can't. Basics of microeconomics, supply, demand, price, metrics of marketing, how PPC works, social media generally. And so, I don't know how old you are, Chris, I'm 47, and I was the second year to do GCSEs, which was an interesting experience because what it meant was we'd sort of, from the age of 11, we were training for one set of exams, which was O-levels, and then it changed.
I was the last year to do O-levels. So
right, okay.
I got off lightly.
Well, no, there were pros and cons of both, definitely. But GCSEs were interesting because they quite radically changed the curriculum in a certain direction. And I think, if anything, you know, Gove and Cummings reversed a lot of that, or certainly tried to and wanted to. But I'll give you an example. So history changed from like just dates and things to how to read documents, right? How to read for bias, how to understand the historical process and the skills of a historian. But that should change again to what you learn from history. I mean, I honestly studied history for, you know, as many years as you have to up to GCSE, and just never had a conversation about what you can learn from those events.
And what's recycling, what's happening again, how's that informing some of the things that we're seeing in you know, the current day.
Right, how to evaluate the news, just how to critically think about these things that are on the news, that most kids in most schools, or let's say a lot of kids, think is just boring because it's just not being made relevant or interesting to them. Languages went from like declining a verb to sort of communicating in situ. But here's the thing, why is it in 2020 kids still aren't taught languages like the Michel Thomas method, which teaches you how to learn a language in the same way that your brain learns a language, how it learns a language when it's 3 years old. You know, you don't learn a language, you certainly don't learn a language by declining verbs, and you definitely don't learn a language by learning how to write a letter to your pen pal in France. You learn a language through the anchoring of certain words to certain meanings and then using those as modules and building blocks. Why isn't the method of learning generally taught?
Well, and learning how to learn. You know, working with a lot of the athletes over the years, we've sought competitive advantage by how do we get better at reflecting and evaluating and embedding knowledge and understanding in order to more confidently perform next time. That kind of, how do different people learn? How do we go about learning? How can we structure that? You know, what can we do to bias sort of embedding of knowledge so that it becomes behavioral action, that's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
But whereas we just expect people to be able to learn the curriculum without learning how to learn, which I think is roundly unfair.
It was just not fair. It's actually mindless. I mean, when you stop and think about it, the reason why that transition from GCSEs to O-levels was really, O-levels to GCSEs was really interesting, is because it did mark one of the biggest steps away from an education system that was literally designed in Victorian England towards something to help people deal with the 20th century. And here we are in the 21st century, and a lot of kids are still learning Latin instead of HTML, right? Latin started off as a class differentiator, and then by 1985, it was a way of training your mind. It was the closest that it came to learning, meta-learning, in fact. Right. But they're still using Latin instead of things that would directly benefit their lives, like learning computer programming. It is mental that that is not on every curriculum as part of this is how you learn to learn programming. Yeah. The most fascinating book I've read in the last 5 years is Bill Bryson's The Body. If you haven't read it, massive recommendation. Everyone I've recommended it to thinks it's fascinating. Why wasn't biology taught like that? Why was biology never, ever, ever taught in terms of it's the subtitle of The Body is a user's manual. Why weren't we ever taught biology in terms of this is what's going on in your body? This is the chemistry of how to build muscle or how to lose fat. It just was never taught.
I've said for a long time, I wish Haynes had done a how to use your brain manual. You've just become the proud owner of brain versus here's how to make the most of it. Here's some features you may have that other models don't have, and kind of how to run with some of that.
Which is going to dominate this conversation, definitely, because in terms of how to make decisions and why people do what they do, that's my big concern. Before being a professional poker player, just to fill people in, after that Biker Grove experience, I was a screenwriter and director. And I learned a story by Robert McKee. Right now, Robert McKee, if you don't know, if you go and work for the BBC or any Hollywood studio, they will put you on Robert McKee's course, which is between about $2,000 and $4,000 for a weekend. Right? Again, it's like the Mind Gym example. Okay, It's a very simple thing. It can be taught. It's a little bit more high level, Robert McKee, than something like the Mind Gym, but there's nothing prevents a 15 and 16-year-old learning it. And so we did English language, GCSE and O-level, where you just taught to go away and write stories without ever being told how to write a story, how to construct narratives. Story, this great fetish in all management leadership paradigms at the moment. We weren't taught it at all. I happen to know a lot of those tools because I was a screenwriter, but most people don't have it. And then finally, for me, a good place to stop is, in terms of mathematics, the maths of gambling. Now, at the very simplest level, so that people can understand gambling, so they can understand how and why they're going to lose money at a roulette table or in a casino. But then at an advanced level, what I teach, which is resource allocation under uncertainty, which has implications for the way that you learn, because it's a resource that you're allocating, which has implications for change and innovation, which is dealing with uncertainty, changing yourself, changing organizations, and leadership and running your own mind generally. So that's quite a long list. I'm sorry I've taken up some time at the beginning of the podcast, but it's quite hard, therefore, to decide within that list, right, of the things that I had no idea about at 18 and to various different extents I've learned more about in the last 30 years, which of those I really want to prioritize, because I just think that we are a species with the longest incubation period of any other species before we let out into the wild. We've decided to fill that time with a structured formal education, and yet it is just woefully doing the job that it sort of proposes to set out to achieve.
Well, it's not really helping people be fit for purpose for a healthy and happy life. It's kind of it's doing something quite different, valuing a certain kind of knowledge. And I guess my reflection there is that sort of, generally speaking, you wish you had more knowledge about the range of knowledge that was available, rather than sort of, just being able to kind of go, well, here's the curriculum, this is all you need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that thing of if something's exciting you, you should find out how little you know. The more you learn there is to learn, and it should give you a thirst for knowledge and learning, which again, I know I keep coming back to this, it sounds like I'm being insecure, but I was an academic kid, right? School didn't leave me behind. I went to a private school with a lot of psychological bullying, but no physical bullying. I wasn't unhappy. I'm one of its success stories. And yet I didn't accept, and this is quite significant, in the subject of economics, which is not coincidentally what I went on to study at Cambridge, although I changed, because I had an inspirational teacher.
Right.
Jeff Riley, let's name check him. He went on to be head of economics at Eton. At a ridiculously young age. I was in the first class he ever taught, having come out of university doing his PGCE. And he gave me a love of the subject. And like, thank God, for inspirational teachers. Because it's the teaching that goes beyond the curriculum and gives you a passion and a thirst to learn this thing. And all these other subjects, I was like, got my A. That's it.
Yeah. And that's, as you were going through the list as well, I was just thinking around, even the representation of what's important. So go back to your poker example, and you're saying, that is actually an exercise in maths. Whereas as you said to me the other day, the movies would have us all believe that the best poker players are the ones who can read the other individuals and have some amazing way of knowing what's going on. It strikes me that they're probably the best individuals who are able to internalize and work out statistically what's going on and be able to use their kind of their confidence in numbers, predictions from that in terms of what course of action to take and when.
Well, let me bounce off that and segue beautifully into what I want to sort of focus on, I think, in this conversation, because it's what I focus on generally. So to use a sporting analogy, I'm a Newcastle fan of the 1996. Let's pretend they won this Premiership.
I'd have loved it if they did.
We will. We had two midfielders in that team called David. One was David Batty and one was David, right? They're both midfielders. They're both playing in the same team, but they're completely different footballers. Okay, one is brilliant at winning the ball on the side 3-foot pass, and one is brilliant at 60-foot or 60-yard passes and moments of genius, but otherwise sort of he's never going to track back. Now the point is, what that shows is what that shows is that you can be good at this thing called football and have completely different skills, right? And poker's exactly the same. There are poker players that are, certainly historically, in the 50s and 60s, those guys in Texas may have been enumerate in some cases.
Okay.
Were, but they were very good at seeing into the soul of the person and telling when they were lying, right? Which is a skill that all businesses want me to teach them and can't really be taught in that way. Now, what then happened in really the late 90s, early 2000s is it started becoming mathematical, because that's the fundamentals of poker. What poker uses is a calculation, right? It says if I don't want to complicate this, but if 50% of the time I'm going to win $100, 50% of $100 is $50. And if 50% of the time I'm going to lose $10, 50% of that $10 is $5, which means I'm going to win $50 on average and lose $5 on average, which means on average I'm making $45, right? That is the fundamental. When people talk about the calculated risk, that is the calculation of risk that sits at the heart of poker, right? But that probability, 50%, where do we get that from? That's the likelihood that he's got the flush or that he's bluffing, or she. And so that's what those guys in Texas were able to do with that. Now, they couldn't articulate that calculation, but like most of maths, that calculation is just an attempt to codify something which we do at a gut level anyway, right? I think he's got it. Oh, I definitely think he's bluffing now, so I call, right? I don't know he's bluffing, but I really think he is. And I'm going to get it right more often than not, and therefore I'm going to make a profit. But I couldn't articulate that calculation, the guys in Texas in the 50s. So then the maths starts to come to the fore, and because it is bottom line a more useful, a more defining aspect of the technique, the mathematicians start to win the day, okay? But what happens then, the gene pool of poker players at the lower limits by 2008-9 was several million, and so the successful genes that bubble up to the top of that pool, the top of what I call the poker pyramid, they do both, okay? They've now, because of online poker, the fact that you can play 10 games at the same time, because every game is 100 hands a minute, 100 hands an hour instead of 30, they've now played the same number of hands by the age of 25 as the Texas guys have played by the age of 80. They've got this, enormous pattern recognition going on, the number of hands they've seen, and the data that they're using from online collection methods allows them to assess probabilities much more successfully even than the Texas guys, right? So now they can do all the maths, live in their brains because they've got PhDs in stats from Stanford, and their probability assessments are brilliant. And so now you have this uber player. It's like Veron. He's tracking back. He can make the side passes and the moments of beauty, and that's who's going to win poker now.
And I guess for anyone in their chosen field of competition endeavor, it's how do you do the equivalent of that, getting the confidence from the learning and taking it with you so that you are ever more able to make the right decisions, back yourself in the right way, predict even the situations that are coming. And again, that's something that isn't really taught in the mix there, is you can do a load of practice, but are you aggregating it into something that's updating your model, giving you more understanding of what next, where do I want to take this, how do I want to move forward? So again, the kind of knowledge acquisition piece, I think, is relevant there as well, because some people could practice loads and not get any better.
Absolutely. So there's at least 2 points to make there. Number one is the point of market efficiency. Is in poker, you used to be able to make a pretty good living if you'd read 4 books, right? I mean, when I was playing, I read 100 books, and that made me phenomenal, right? Now I'm nothing. That's really important. That's why I'm not a professional poker player anymore, because the market's so efficient. The level that you have to be now to make a profit in that market, because of this coming together of those work skills that, broadly speaking, in a much smaller gene pool, some people had and some people didn't, right? So that's the first point. The second point is that being good at poker means being good at probability, right? So whereas the Texas guys would go, I don't think you've got the kings, I call, okay? They wouldn't be able to conceptualize in 1968 what a player's doing now, which is going, I reckon there's a 22% chance that they got kings. I reckon there's a 32% chance that they got aces, a 15% chance that they've got ace king, and then a 35% chance of blank, right? And then putting that into a calculation to come up with an expectation to decide whether to call or not. I mean, that's not just beyond the ken of the guys in 1968. It's like it wouldn't have occurred to them that's what they should be doing, okay? And my point that I want to get to is that that's what education doesn't allow you to do either, is to live in the ambiguity, because of what we were sort of talking about in that little brief intro, you and I, which is that in education, there's a right or wrong answer. And what poker's training you is the idea that there isn't a right or wrong answer, okay? And then you come to this third point, which is what you said, the last thing you just said there before I started speaking, which is this idea of iteration. And that absolutely is the thing that I think, if there's one thing that I wish that I'd known when I was 18 that I don't know now, it's that ambiguity, it's a really good place to be. To exist. It's where I've been for the last 2 or 3 months with the pandemic, is I haven't been trying to, do 2 or 3 speeches a week and hit it out the park and be on point. And I don't sleep when it's like that, because I've got to get every plane and I can't be relaxed, and there's no margin for error. My clients pay me the money that the speech is perfect. And I know it sounds a bit pretentious, but I sort of envisage myself as being a bit like a 100-meter runner, is that I've got to live the rest of my week that those 3 hours are perfect. And I find that very stressful. And this idea, I mean, at 18, I got glandular fever. I was that classic kind of, stressed about exams kid, because I wanted everything to be perfect. And I think the last 30 years of my life have been a growing realization that it doesn't have to be, it probably never will be. And that there is something intensely good and productive about it not being. And I give you a specific example about that from one of sort of 2 or 3 realms of my life, and that is directing, right? When I started directing, so I go to Cambridge, I don't really want to do economics at all, which they sort of know quite quickly. So I want to direct plays, do the foot. I'm very lucky. I have a phenomenally talented year. Olivia Coleman is one of my good friends. David Mitchell, Rob Webb. Technically, I put them together. Great people. And one of my early productions was the Footlights pantomime, right? And the Footlights pantomime is like the biggest, most expensive show of the year. I'm doing the first term of my second year. And it's like directing an action movie, because it's really about, when the explosion goes off and how we get Cinderella's carriage to appear on the stage and this kind of thing. And so you're directing, right? You're putting people and you're going, that's good, say it like this, leave a pause there because that's funnier. And and I was quite good. I was quite good at that kind of directing, and I enjoyed that kind of directing. But my development as a director was to get to a place where you didn't tell people how to say lines. Okay,
Right.
You just allowed them to do it, and then you nudged it, and you did what you've referred to, which is call it iteration, call it feedback, call it honing.
Yeah.
You didn't get het up that the first thing didn't work. You relaxed and tried it a completely different way.
Yeah.
You played with it. And so rather than the success of the scene standing or falling by your ability to tell people how this scene is going to work, you allowed people to find it in that ambiguity. And it has so many different benefits. Like, number one, they take it as a management method. It's not unique to theatre, obviously. They take ownership of it because they've found it.
Yeah,
Told them how to do
well,
something.
intrinsic motivation goes up, so there's more commitment to it because they're self-discovered. Yeah.
Number two is like the sum of the parts. The whole is much greater than the sum of the parts, and much greater than you know, saying this is how this scene runs and is funny. Number three, you achieve something by the end of it that has been through, there's a concept called the J curve, which is actually a political concept, which societies need to go through a sort of fracturing and breakdown before they come together more whole, right? But it can be applied to anything. It's just dead simple. Things get worse before they get better. Decorate your house, right?
Yeah.
Things get worse before they get better.
Yeah.
And if you are prepared to enjoy that period, you talked about conscious improvement through feedback, and I'm sure at some point during the series you'll talk to Matthew Said, writer of the great book Bounce, which is about directed practice. And there's a brilliant statistic in that I often quote, which is the ice dancers statistic. So some ice dancers in the United States win many more gold medals than other dancers, and there's a researcher called Jeff Colvin who wants to try and find out why that is and to correlate it against something else in their lives, in the data. I think he starts by thinking it might have something to do with their parental professional class or upbringing. No correlation. Maybe their own academic ability. No correlation. Hours spent on the rink, yes, because practice makes perfect. But the single strongest correlation he can find is between gold medals won and the number of times they fall over during practice, because they're trying to do something that they can't do at the moment. Yeah. Now, I hate this word failure in many ways for reasons we may come to, because it's such an emotive word, and because the idea of failing turns people off. But essentially, that's what you do when you fall over during practice, or as Claire Balding talked about, falling off the horse. Yeah. And there is a reason which mathematically we can prove why this is, but forget the maths for a moment. It's about being comfortable with iteration and imperfection, and knowing that you'll get to somewhere more satisfying and beautiful and successful in the end. Yeah,
well, and those examples both speak to the fact that if you haven't got a frame of reference as what is correct in the first place, you are far more likely to find what version of correct you would, is gratifying and feels like it was a worthwhile journey to go on.
Absolutely.
Education-wise, we're constantly given, right, that'll get you 100%. And we'll just take marks off if you are not successful against. So that's the unhelpful failure reference of and you directing. Well, I haven't got my picture of perfect that I'm giving you. Let's just find out what version of this scene we are going to create and how that gets delivered. And let's not have a fixed point to feel we've failed against. Yeah, that's freeing. That's that freedom in learning.
Absolutely. Being prepared, in that ice dance scenario, being as actors in their rehearsal room, just falling over a lot in practice. I used to. So one of my realizations of this, so I'm 18 on the 17th of June 1991, and I take a year out and I go to Cambridge. And in those first 2 years, the way that I used to describe it was, like night vision. If you look directly at something, whatever it is about the rods and cones in your eyes, if you look directly at something in the night, you can't see it. It's 15 degrees off that you can see. And that was the way that I sort of described directing, is if you try and achieve this, you won't actually achieve it anyway. You'll achieve something that's maybe a bit like it, and maybe it's better, but maybe not. But as frustrating as it can be, I hope I can say this. I got a reputation early on in Cambridge for being a good director, okay? Right. And the reputation, it was ill-founded, is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. I knew who were the best directors of my generation at Cambridge, and it wasn't me. A couple of them are quite famous now. and they were doing what I'm describing now. They were allowing their cast to find it. But the casts all thought I was good because I went into the room with a clear idea and gave them clear direction, right? And people like clear direction because, again, particularly at a place like Cambridge, which I've said way too much in this conversation, but particularly where everyone strives for, they've all got a lot of right answers in their life. They've all got a lot of A's, right? They've all got a lot of gold stars. They like knowing right answers. You know, they like someone going in with that kind of clarity and going boom, 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 boom. Whoops! There go my trousers. That's how the laugh gets.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that there is, again, that educational reference. So I tell Americans I went to school in Cambridge. It was just sixth form college, and I reduced the A-level grade myself because it was part of it was an Oxbridge sixth form college, and I just brought the average grade down by my failure to sort of do anything in any particular way there. But it is that kind of reference point of people want to know what right looks like because they've been taught to kind of work that, they feel comfortable in that space, rather than actually you're going to have to define this for yourself and use a completely different frame of thinking, which is about determining the answer and being able to say why you think it's the answer, rather than showing someone else that the answer that they want you to give. And and from a confidence point of view, they are totally different. One's confident to be yourself, the other one's confident to be right in the eyes of someone else. Motivationally, that just changes the game.
So as I'm sure many of your viewers know, one of the great writers about this when it comes to education is Carol Dweck, who talks about the growth mindset, which sits absolutely directly on this spine, is this idea that it's not about the quest for the right answer, it's about the quest for the right method, method that can cope with it. And it has parallels in Darwin, of course, which is it's not the strongest or the fittest that survive, it's those most able to adapt and learn. And that can be true of a static system, let alone a dynamic system. But I wanted to ask you, therefore, because as a speaker, I'm a lone wolf, really. I don't get, I only really get the opportunity to practice this on myself. I would say that the majority of companies that I go into and start talking like this are quite daunted by the idea at first. But I am genuinely interested in your experience of working with elite athletes. Would they have fallen into those two camps as well? Would there have been a majority in one or the other? How would they have responded in the main to being told to find their own way rather than getting right answers from you?
So
that's the wrong way of putting it, but
yeah. So definitely from the coaches, the coaches are the people who are providing the training program, the technical model. They're giving feedback, and there's definitely. I've talked a lot over the years to say there are a couple of kinds of athletes. There's ones who exploit the training program, and there's others who do the training program.
Okay.
The ones who exploit the training program are able to kind of go, where am I? What kind of athlete do I think I'm going to be? What's the stimulus of this training program, and how am I going to use that to help me grow how I want to grow? And there's the other athletes who kind of go, this is a successful system. I'm going to do everything the coaches tell me. And they're brilliant, and physiologically everything, they will do what's required. But when it comes to racing, the person who has exploited the training program, who has developed that independent desire to kind of take the steps themselves, I think they're more robustly prepared for that incredible moment of scrutiny when you're asking, will I be good enough? So you're asking, the ones who have exploited it are kind of going, I want to find out whether I'm going to be good enough. The ones who have done the training program really they have to work harder to fight against that. I mustn't fail. I've done the training. I mustn't let the coach down. I've done the training. I mustn't be one of the people who it didn't work for. And so you do get quite a difference in the foundation of confidence.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing that I see the difference. The really great performers are the ones who it's tough for them to lose confidence.
Yeah.
The ones who are good, but maybe don't quite have that sense of kind of, ambition and drive. Confidence is present, but it can be lost and undermined much more quickly.
Yeah.
So, and that's the bit where I think it's that self-determined foundation is one that allows you to accept responsibility for what's going to happen. And that's freeing. It's still not easy. It's still not easy.
No,
but
no.
Stack the odds in your favour.
It's harder, I think. So
Yeah.
there's lots of different examples of this in poker, but I'll give you one which I think just you can reflect back so easily into different areas of society, which, by the way, don't necessarily have to do with learning. And this is one of the things that I get very sort of animated about, because I'm a speaker who has ended up being a speaker who might be classed as a motivational speaker. Okay, because there's massive overlap between what I talk about and kind of motivational speakers subject matter. Right, I'll give you the situation in poker. Let's imagine you've got 4 aces, okay, and it's the river cards out, so there's no more cards to come, and your opponent clearly has quite a good hand, okay, and you've got 4 aces. You can be beaten by a straight flush. But let's say there's no straight flush on the board. All right, so you're going to win this hand, okay? So what you're trying to do now is you're trying to make a bet that, and here's the key, maximizes your long-term expectation, okay? Yeah. So what I mean by that is, let's say you bet 10,000 and there's a 50% chance that he calls 10,000, okay? That means sometimes you're going to win it, sometimes you're going to lose it, but in the long run, the way that we calculate that is 50% of 10,000. If that's right, okay, is 5,000. That's your expectation with that bet. But 50% of the time, your opponent's going to fold.
Yeah.
Okay? Well, now let's say you bet 2,000, and there's a 90% chance that they'll call 2,000. Okay? So 90% of 2,000 is 1,800. Right now, there's only a 10% chance now that your opponent's going to fold.
Yeah.
But the long-term expectation, the value of that bet is much, 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 much less. Okay. And therefore, and again, I know that we've plucked those numbers out of the blue, and it comes to something which an economist would call the price elasticity of the call. But you are better off as a poker player. It's a much more profitable play to make the £5,000 bet, even though there's a 50% chance that your opponent will fold. And it will look to the outsider like, oh, you bet too big, you got greedy. Okay.
Yeah.
That has massive implications for all of this that we're talking about, okay? Because what if you apply that to Jeff Colvin skaters, in trying to do the thing that they can't do at the moment, they're making £5,000 bets, but they're falling over more often. Yeah. But the value of each of those actions, that's why this concept of learning is about return on investment under uncertainty. The value of each of those actions is worth more. In that sense, the ROI is the learning, is the expanding their body's capability. Yeah. Let me give you another example. And before I give this example, because I really, really don't want to go out to the world defending this Tory government, I'm just going to say I'm a lefty, all right? And so what I'm about to say now pains me, but it's actually really important. When Hancock may or may not have hit his 100,000 tests per day target, there's a huge outcry on Twitter and, in the Mirror and the Guardian about, oh, they're fiddling it. And let's say they didn't, right? Let's say they didn't. Let's say they made 70,000. What is better? Matt Hancock promising to do 20,000 a day and hitting it, exceeding it, making 22,000, or trying to achieve 100,000 and failing and making 70,000?
Yeah. That's
a really important point, I think, for the world in which we live and for the way in which, particularly our public services are run, because we get the public services that the Daily Mail deserves. They weren't guilty on this occasion, I don't think, because it's a Tory government, but do a session with anyone from the public sector and it's the fear of what the Daily Mail will say if they try to do something and fail that stops them from doing it. But it's also true for private companies and organizations and sports people, are you prepared to do something which in this case is a bigger bet, in that case might be setting yourself a bigger target, might mean a bigger investment, could be of energy, could be a greater risk of injury, could be status, standing, reputation, respect, credibility, self-respect, self-esteem. These are all scarce resources that we have and that we could lose. Are you prepared to take that route? Am I, as a director in a rehearsal room, prepared to do a whole series of things which don't quite work, but where in the long run, once the expectation is realized by the long run of the J-curve, yields the additional value, rather than going bish bash bosh, everyone feels comfortable, but the end result isn't as good.
Yeah.
And that's where I think education fails.
Yeah, and again, so I just relay that straight again from the education piece. There's the bar, and you're either above it or you're not. Rather than, all the stuff we end up talking to people about in the business world is around, what goals you can set them, and you can set them in a number of ways. They don't just have to be a hit or miss thing, you know. You can set one target, which is if everything goes amazingly, what might this look like? Or we can have another one that then sits underneath it, and you say, right, well, if we do what we know we're capable of, that's going to make us proud and sort of satisfied, what will that look like? And then we can set another one, which is, given what we are, what is the bare minimum we'd expect and accept of ourselves in this situation? Yeah. I don't know why we carry on with these, black and white success and failure when there's such a nuance. We can create the nuance in advance and then bounce off those different reference points depending upon what our first data point tells us. Well, actually, we're still on for the moonshot. Brilliant. We'll keep going for that. Actually, it looks like, minimal acceptable. Let's still keep working away from that and push away from that, see if we can get some progress. But it gives us different ways of using our motivational energy, rather than, again, what we're taught from school is, good people get high scores, not so good people don't, if you're not tracking for a good one, expect to be roundly demotivated and not particularly much use to people. We need to build more in.
Work tries to move people away from that. I'm sure your work tries to move people away from that. For my final thought here is, the question is, what would you do differently if you knew then what you know now?
Yeah.
In some cases, I would do exactly the same. Okay, because in some cases, I specifically did certain things for about 2.5 years. I was an actor, I was a writer, I was a director, I was a professional poker player, I ran a company. I then found speaking and training and found my bliss. Okay. And since then, I've been very focused and honed, and I've done 2,500 sessions, and I think I'm all right at it. But how did I find that? It was by being prepared to both start and, whole conversation that we haven't had, stop doing those things, right? To redirect my resources, because for anything new to start, something old has to stop. Not all quitting is bad. It's actually liberating. Yeah. But what I would say, I don't know the average age of the people who watch this, but I know I was talking the other day to a group at university, sort of 24, 25 postgrads. And of course, Corona has been a huge blow to their lives, like all of their life. But I mean, my life plans have been upset, but their life plans have been completely turned over. What are they going to do for the next 2 or 3 years in that kind of job market? Yeah. And my point to them was, and a book which we mentioned in the preamble to each other, or a recommendation, is a book called Range, which specifically makes this argument for in that context, the context of your career, but we've been talking about lots of different contexts during this conversation, being happy in that ambiguity, being happy with the imperfection. Best piece of advice that I had in that period of my life, I think that gave me the life that I had, was from my agent, bless him, who went on to lose me as a screenwriter as a result. But he said, doesn't matter what you're doing before you're 30, as long as you're doing something. Right. And that is a brilliant piece of advice. Yeah. Do things that you're passionate about, that you want to do. I know you've got to pay the rent. I know that's really important. But what school instills in us is this need for focus and results, and it's got to be now. And that is not necessarily the way to true success.
Yes.
But I've got a great friend who, for much of his life, was as a brickie. It's called Dave Johns. You'll know who he is. He's the star of I, Daniel Blake, the Ken Loach film that won the Palme d'Or. Right. And when he was a brickie, he was really funny. And we always used to say to him, mate, you're so funny, you should be a comedian. And eventually, like in his late 30s, he became a comedian. Then he started running comedy clubs. And for most of the last 25 years, he's been a comedian. And then late in his life, he's been an actor occasionally. Mm-hmm. A day on Spender together. And then, Ken Loach casts him in this film, and they win the Palme d'Or, and his whole life is different. That did not come from doing the sensible thing first off. His life meandered a bit, but he got to a better place as a result.
Yeah, no, really clear. And, there's a lot of the messages coming out from these conversations about ultimately people having the confidence to be themselves and kind of, make the most of what they have sort of now determined is their talent and their bliss and their calling and their passion. And it, I guess for me, it's how do we help people get on the pathway to finding that in a meaningful way and early, not necessarily speeding things up, but helping people be confident to be themselves, because we give lots of people lots of training about how not to be confident to be themselves, but to wish they were someone else or more like other people. So it's brilliant reflections, Caspar, and we could carry on, I'm sure, for a lot longer. However, I know you've got lunch to get to and other things to do as well. So amazing stuff. Thank you very, very much. It's a podcast relay and you're handing over. So I'd love to know who you're going to hand over to and why, and then we can get ready for leg 6 next week.
Yeah, so I'm going to hand over to a guy called Dan Pembridge, who I know lots of people better than I know Dan, but he's a fascinating guy. I won't try and summarize his life, but he's someone who has embraced risk in a different and much more scary and admirable context than me at the poker table, in literally life-threatening situations. And yeah, he's going to talk about a similar thing, but from a different perspective, move the conversation on and hand the baton to someone else afterwards.
Brilliant. So thank you very much. I will go and do some research on Dan. I'll look forward to finding out about him and getting ready for next week. Another take on risk then. So I'll be very much looking forward to that. Caspar, brilliant. Thank you very much. This is on YouTube Live. It's going to be there for people. It will be on our website, the Performance Room, as well, within the next half an hour or so. The people in the background will get working on that, and that will be available. It's great. Just you know, I'm delighted where the podcast relay is taking me with these different conversations, and we'll chat again very soon. But thank you for your time this afternoon, sir. Thank you for everyone who's tuned in, and thank you for everyone who watches again on many of the sources that we've got afterwards. And thanks for the comments in there. But enjoy your afternoon, everyone. Take care, and see you next week. Thank you, Caspar. Cheers.